Hey there. This show is only possible because of your support at patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv. If you're not currently supporting us there, consider going to patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv and checking out the reward tiers, seeing what you can get in return. It is a great way, again, to help this show and other shows like it be possible. Welcome to Radio Free Midworld, a podcast about the Dark Tower series of books by Stephen King. My name is Cole Ross, and I'm your host, and today I am joined by Sean Wagoner. Hey, Sean.
Hello.
Hey. It's been a little bit since you've been on, but I'm super happy to have you back.
Yeah, it's great to come back to this interesting entry in the series.
Now, so we're continuing to talk about The Wind Through the Keyhole. Specifically, we're hitting the first part of kind of the fable within the middle of the book, the story that is within the story that is within the story. Had you read this book before?
I had, but this is the one I have the least experience with. I've gone through the series twice, but only this book once.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting to have you on for this, just because it is such a different glimpse of Midworld, of a different time, and kind of a different, a different kind of mode of storytelling, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny coming to this, and especially coming to this at this point, because when I read it through the first time, it was 8. I read them in the order they were released, so I think reading this at this point where it sort of chronologically falls is interesting because you still get some of that later series feel to just some of the references and just some of the stuff going on in there. So
yeah.
it falls at an interesting place if you're reading it, where we've slid it into the lineup.
For sure. We talked about it last episode about how this is kind of a needed buffer between the first half of the series and the second half.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And, there are any number of kind of references to, the higher level, like cosmic concepts, like at the very end of the section, I think it's the first time we hear the name Gan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, why don't we go ahead and jump into it? Because I'm excited. Really, I'm just excited to get more Randall Flagg content, honestly.
Yep.
So, last time our quartet, was trapped inside on a snow day, or a stark blast. See that's not a good joke because you can see on the notes that I wrote that down. And I was like, I want to get that. No, but they're inside. Nothing better to do than listen to some stories. So Roland, kind of started the tale of what he did after they went to Magus, after they went to Hambry. This mission that he did to Debaria to deal with a murderous shapeshifter. And within that tale, Roland also tells another tale, this time to the sole survivor of this Skin Man's attack. And these next 2 episodes are going to concern themselves with that tale.
Yeah, which threw me off. It's funny coming back to this because actually coming on for this, listening back through on audiobook, and I forgot that there's so many like Inception going on here. I actually forgot that the frame that exists around this story was in the book for whatever reason. I was thinking Roland was telling about the Stark Blast, and it's my memory is just a little hazy on where it ultimately goes, but I think it's kind of interesting that like if you're imagining Roland telling this story during the Stark Blast and then going into this other story, it's just like it sort of reminds me of like if you're listening, like in my experience, someone who's a little older and they're like, so I was going to the grocery store and I happened to see Jennifer. Jennifer, she used to work there at the mill. I remember at the mill,
So I told you that story so I could tell you this story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because this seems like the more applicable one of the stories.
For sure, because like the idea, like the inspiration, was the Stark Blast. It was the the Billy Bumblers, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm happy we got the werewolf story on the on the outside because it's a good mystery. But yeah, it's if there is one of them that can go, I think it is that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think the reasoning maybe ultimately is like the part I wouldn't want to take out is I think that ultimately Roland's relationship with his mom is very important in this book,
Yes.
but this sort of contains, as my memory sort of indicates, that this is the more memorable part overall.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Yeah. And that's been kind of the reaction or the story that's come up from people who were kind of going through this series for the first time is like, oh, I'm a little bit fatigued by the flashback kind of angle of things.
mhm.
But oh, Tim, like Tim's story.
Yeah,
Come on, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, let's start talking about Tim and kind of the small cast of characters here. So the story takes place next to the Endless Wood, this big ironwood forest that is full of mystery and things like that, in this town of Tree, kind of a logging town. And our main character is, another stock standard Stephen King young boy, Tim Ross, who's got this really just kind of like lovely and pleasant dad, Big Jim Ross, Big Ross they call him. And he's got this mom named Nell. His dad's a logger, and he says that, once I die, you're going to get my lucky coin, you're going to get my axe, and you're going to get my house. Right. And we only get a little bit of kind of time with this family together as a whole before Big Ross bites it.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, this is kind of funny. This his four things he'll give you, because they said that was kind of a nighttime story, and I have kids, and so I'm always trying to think of what to do at night, for the bedtime routine. And I've never thought like reading out my will to my kid just to make sure that they know where everything stands. But
Yeah, just it's a little bit of nothing settles a kid like reminding them of your impending mortality.
yeah, exactly. And I figured if that didn't work, I could also tell my kid a fairy tale in which the father dies and then his mom gets abused for a while.
Yeah, that's basically
'Cause
any Pixar movie though.
yeah, yeah, basically, yeah. It's a little more on the outside than maybe it's framed in this story, but
A little bit, yeah. Because stuff's pretty dark here.
ooh,
So Big Jim had a partner, a logging partner, one to they got a saying, one to saw, one to keep watch, right? Big Kells, and Big Kells is a real piece of work. He's the one who kind of returns with the bad news. Of all the ways to go, Big Ross was cooked, evaporated, destroyed by a dragon.
yep. Very fairy tale archetype. So
Yeah. I love the way this pays off too, because man, you couldn't have come up with a more believable story.
yeah,
Everybody buys it though. I guess when you
yep.
live next to the endless woods, right?
Yeah, exactly. In a town called Tree,
Yes.
which is a little on the nose, perhaps,
A
for what they do.
a little bit. So, this creates problems, because this is a town that is, under the watch of Gilead. They have to pay taxes. And his mom, Nell, is really, really worried because when the Covenant man comes around, they won't have anything to give him, and they're going to have to basically give up their house and be turned out onto the land. Yeah.
Well, rock in a hard place.
Yeah, I love the name Covenant Man.
Yeah, I know.
I love the character Covenant Man, but just the image that conjures up, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. On his big horse, all dressed in black with his white face and red lips.
Yeah, his red lips. That is
Yeah,
that's a detail, isn't it?
yeah. It's a very I feel like Stephen King. Like, oh, I didn't know that this could be the creepy part about a person in this way.
Is it just lively in this one very specific way? Yeah. But they have an out. And they've been backed into a corner, but they've got an escape rope because Big Kells, he approaches hat in hand and asks for Nell's hand in marriage, saying, "Hey, I've got a house that I can sell, and we can make our go together." Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just and immediately reads as a very bad idea.
Yeah, even before you get the details that like he used to be a real big drinker, Big
Yeah,
Ross was able to keep him in check, but he was real
yeah,
violent, kind of a brawler kind of guy.
yeah, exactly. It's just these like details, like he's hat in hand. She knows what's up because he's all dressed up, and
He's
she
shaved and cleaned.
yeah, and then as soon as she's like unsure in response, I don't exactly know how it's written, but it just talks about how there's a change in his eyes, and you're just like, no, this guy. I've read enough Stephen King. I know what this guy's gonna be like. So.
I know which Wells is going to go to for this.
Yep, the Kells Wells.
The Kel and Nell well. Yeah. So, he swore off drinking after his first wife died. And it's really sweet, like the very functional relationship that Tim and Nell have with each other, right? Like she says, like, is this something that you're okay with? And of course, Tim's like 11 years old. He has no has no insight into what might be the case, but the fact that it is kind of a collaboration, at least speaks to their closeness.
Yeah, I liked that scene where she's sort of delivering the news, and she pretty much knows the decision's up to her, but she's still looking for that input. She still wants to sort of feel them out before she moves ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So they decide, yeah, let's do it. We don't seem to have that many other options. So they do it. And, a couple of ominous signs, even though he had sworn off of drink, he drank of the graph at the wedding reception. And then Tim starts hearing sounds at night, starts hearing, hitting and crying and their mysterious bruises. It's just it's a real bad scene.
Oh, it's extremely uncomfortable. And once again, this is a fairy tale that Gabrielle Duchesne would tell to Roland as a kid.
that people across the kingdom would tell, specifically
exactly.
to illustrate that maybe you should pay attention when your raccoon dog starts going nuts.
Very heavy.
Kells sells his house, and Tim goes to help him claim his only remaining possession, this locked chest that Kells doesn't let anybody look inside. But also he kind of treats it like a sacred pet. Like later on when the Covenant Man is talking about this, he asks, like, does he, treat it like a beloved dog?
Exactly. Yeah. If he touches it when he walks by.
Yeah. Why can't you kids stay away from my forbidden closet of mystery?
Exactly.
And along with this kind of abuse of Nell, Kells is also generally a bore and kind of squandering the potential that Tim might have. Tim's this really bright kid who loves school, but Kells takes him and makes him work at the sawmill stacking lumber, which sounds like very let's say stimulating work.
Yeah, very labor intensive for sure, but not exactly not much to do with the Mathematica.
Yeah. What do you think of the widow Smack?
I mean, I think she's one of the more interesting characters in this, and I they're all pretty interesting, but I mean, she definitely stood out as I wasn't quite sure her place in all of it, but she's a pretty central figure actually throughout it with her veil and knowing that underneath is some like chewed up face with pox or whatever gross stuff King chose to employ for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, just very interesting. I guess she used to be like maybe from Gilead, or she was like a higher status wise, but now she's just like this lady in this out of the way town.
Yeah, she's like the she's like the school mistress. Like the people pay, or the kids pay tuition, or the families pay tuition by basically giving her vegetables and helping to feed and care for her mules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I end up liking the widow Smack an awful lot just because she's just really on top of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And she has some of my like favorite lines throughout like little sayings, and just the way she speaks, and She has a lot of good like one-liners to Tim as all this madness is going on.
Yeah. She tries to be to be a grounding figure, but is not able to stop what has been set in motion, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I like that she kind of rolls with it. She, instead of just her character, I assumed going in that she would try to really stop him, and she does. But when she realizes that at certain times he can't be stopped, she decides to actually help him and put a little faith in Tim.
Yeah, and arm him.
and arm an 11-year-old with various weapons.
Yeah. So I can't not talk about the Covenant Man, not only because that's the next beat in the story, but also because I mean it's Randall Flagg, right?
Yeah.
There is no doubt that this is the figure. This seems like a Randall Flagg that is closer to the one in Eyes of the Dragon.
That's what I've heard. I haven't. I've listened to the episode about Eyes of the Dragon, but that's my only experience. But that's from what I understand. That does seem to be true.
Yeah, and listening to this again, this is the first time that I've read it after having read Eyes of the Dragon. It's been really remarkable to notice the comparisons between those two, just because I mean, like both of them are fairy tales of a sort.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was an interesting sort of play on this, just like this figure showing up in some pretty central sort of fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to think about too is, so Roland is telling the story, and he heard it from Gabrielle, and it's a sort of widely known tale. Do they know who they're talking about?
I don't know.
Like I gather that they don't, because I think Roland would have said something, especially given that they had a pretty serious encounter with him.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and also Gabrielle, like, oh, this is the person that I decided to sleep with extramaritally.
Exactly.
Got to tell you a bedtime story about my paramour. Okay, Mom.
Yeah, which it goes into sort of a larger thematic thing I find interesting is like there's a lot of dramatic irony working in this book at a lot of different levels, including Roland telling the story about someone, his like arch nemesis, and then not knowing it, and then just all this stuff with really only the reader really getting the full picture. But
the parts that make it abundantly clear that this is Randall Flagg or Walter O'Dim or whatever whatever other name you want to apply to him, the things that make it abundantly clear are his manner of speech and also just kind of his knowledge of our world and general kind of just kind of insight into the other levels of the tower, right?
Yep, and he also has one pretty serious line that relates to the end of the story and his own storyline about how his curiosity will be the death of him. So it was a pretty good nod toward where things go, which it got me wondering, is that foreshadowing technically? Because it was released, like, I guess in this order you could call it foreshadowing, but
I think so. I think in publishing order it's a callback. In reading order it is foreshadowing.
Yeah, the old callback foreshadow.
Yep. Timey-wimey.
Yep.
Yeah. So but yeah, the Covenant Man, he's the tax collector for Gilead. One of my favorite details about this is like this isn't his job, it's his hobby. Yeah, I like this as a hobby. The Widow Smack says, yeah, he's not a person who has jobs. He has hobbies. And just the idea that somebody would, travel around doing this work is presumably gratis, just for the ability to ruin people's lives and make them uncomfortable. Yeah.
That's like an incredible like level of like mundane evil.
Uh-huh.
But I really liked that.
But it plays into it plays into the idea of Randall Flagg, or this archetype throughout King's works being primarily kind of like a political saboteur, right?
Yep.
Be it as Martin helping out the good man, kind of building up that, or in Randall Flagg's case, all of his buttons for his various causes and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, and even here, like this is very much also, if you look at this as a fable, like it can also be like an explanation as to why the good man and, John Farson got started, even dropped here in the line, perhaps they were already waiting for a good man to appear and make them strong enough to say, no more, enough's enough, the world has moved on. By being this arm of Gilead, he is going around and like starting a slow burn for this kind of populist revolt, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things I thought was really interesting, was how at various points King definitely ties that in. Because, I mean, the taxes are really the big problem in this. And even over the course, like Tim, like being the protagonist and you're really rooting for him, he's very anti-Gilead by the end of this, because he sees it as all the problems. So taking that and then imagining that, that Flag is just kind of twisting it, and he's just sort of massaging this resentment, is just it's a real long con.
it's real commitment, right? But when you enjoy the work,
it flies by.
Yeah. So he arrives on this massive horse. He's wearing a saddle. It's described as it costs like more than Big Ross would make in 25 years. I love this description of his voice too, because he, has this low monotone. The description is like listening to a deaf man try to sing a lullaby. And coincidentally, Nell says that the Covenant Man has never aged. He's been coming around since she was a child, and he's always been the same, been fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he pulls Tim up on the horse, you feel so uncomfortable. Like, even knowing his flair of evil, like you're still just you just like, I like kind of like pulled away from my desk a little bit where I was listening, just because it's so uncomfortable to imagine just being up there next to him.
Yeah. Imagine it'd be like roughly like 5 degrees colder when you're close to him or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, even Nell, like when the Covenant Man calls Tim over, she like reaches to grab him like instinctually, wanted to keep her kid away. But yeah, like just even his presence, coming in and saying like, yeah, so you sold your home, gonna have to assess you for tax on that. And then Kells kind of gives not the first sign that something's wrong, but a pretty good one. He starts blabbering. He starts babbling about like, like going over the details over this kind of rehearsed story about the way that Big Ross died.
Mm-hmm.
Until Covenant Man's like, no, stop it, shut up. I want Tim. Have your child carry the silver to me because of his innocence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like how he has the I like my stories to start with buy a go, or whatever the phrasing is. It's just like I couldn't quite figure out if that was like a little bit of like a comment like, I know you're full of shit, but I sort of took it that way, as him just he already has a good idea of what's actually going on here, and it was nice to see Kells just put in his place, because he's this really imposing figure, and the Covenant Man just instantly wilts him.
Instantly undone.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but like you said, the Covenant Man pulls Tim up onto the horse and has kind of a little bit of a palaver, a bit of one-on-one. And even gives him a little gift, saying like, hey, I want to give you something. Here's this key. Guess what? It'll open any lock you find, but it'll only work once.
Yeah.
And pretty much directly puts it in Tim's mind that it is, like, use this to open Kel's chest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It gets really, really fairy. He's the most fairy tale-ish character when he comes in, is, like, Big Tim was killed by a dragon, but as soon as this came in with the key, you're just like, yes, like, this is the fairy tale thing where they get the magic item, and it just ramps up right there.
Yeah. And for as much as it plays into that kind of like stock notion of like, hey, this is how a fairy tale should go, it can't be underlined enough just how scheming the Covenant Man is. Mm-hmm. Everything he is doing is setting up, is setting up a greater tragedy, or trying to, get people to walk into more misfortune, right? Yeah. Even the key, like that directly leads into the terrible thing that happens to Tim's mom.
Yep.
Yeah. So Tim returns, Nels is in a rage, like, and instead of asking like, "Hey, did he hurt you? Did he tell you something weird?" Nels's first instinct is that did he say something about me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And kind of the altercation here ultimately leads to Nell's Kel's hitting Nell, basically in broad daylight, right in front of her kid.
Yeah, and does he hit Tim as well?
He goes to hit Tim.
Okay.
Then Nell stops him, and he wheels around and hits her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Either way, it's this really real turning point where it's like, okay, it's sort of behind closed doors, but now it's just, here's the family dynamic. I'm going to hit you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, in broad daylight, basically right on their front doorstep. It's
very uncomfortable.
it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kel storms away, and Tim says, like, all right, you know what? Fuck it. I don't care. I'm going to open up his chest. I'm going to see what he's hiding. And inside, he's got his, it's basically like a story about Kel's character. He's got his extra axe heads, which are rusty from neglect. It has his dad's tools. Kel's dad was a carpenter, and has got these valuable tools that could have been sold to pay off the debt many times over, but he held on to them like a miser. Yeah. And then most tellingly at the very bottom is the lucky coin.
Yep.
Big Ross's lucky coin.
Yep. And it's not melted. There's no indication of any dragon attack on it.
Nope. Yeah.
But, it's intact.
Yeah. The saying is that if a dragon gets you, it'll get rid of anything. It'll burn everything away, buckles and all. So Tim, wanting answers to this mystery, decides to close the chest, but he can't relock it. And this is really, really important. He closes as best he can and then heads up the road to meet the Covenant man at his camp, within the Ironwood. I love the description of these trees, of this wooded path. Like, the setting in this is amazing because they talk about these Ironwoods, the ones that people were not able to cut away, growing up until they kind of basically pierce the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Covenant man offers him some stew and says, "Hey, that's not poison," which is a great way to make somebody think you're about to poison them.
Yeah, no, just I mean, he's such a good character. Just every time he talks, there's just that, like, just stuff like that where you're just like, you know what? Just no trust. He'll never let you gain any trust with him.
Nope. And like, this whole section gets really kind of like loaded with some detail, and again, you get a sense of how of just how meticulous he is about the way that he lets these things slip. Like, it's slip like, the last of the dragons died off in Garland. That was, Garland, a kingdom a long way away. In the eyes of the dragon, that is where Randall Flagg was originally from. And Tim doesn't notice it right away, but definitely comes up later after the object lesson that the collective noun for a group of dragons is a bonfire.
Yep.
A murder of crows, a throckin of bumblers, and a bonfire of dragons.
Yep. It's a good choice.
So, he goes on to reveal more of this information by having Tim do some chores for him. He walks around, he travels, he's got this solid silver basin that he carries around on his back. And he has Tim go and draw some of this kind of like stagnant and buggy water.
Those bugs are so gross. The little like telescopic eyes or whatever they have going on. They're like black and white, which feels very unnatural for a bug for some reason. Just very gross.
They're like pale, bloated maggots. Like, he says, "Hey, this water's stagnant," and then basically you're stagnant or is toxic or whatever. And then Randall Flagg's like, "Oh, the world's toxic, but we're used to it." And also, like, the Covenant man has decided to take up camp next to a gigantic snake.
Yep, a Pookie.
A Pookie. I love it. It's a Pookie. His head's bigger than Tim's mom, or than Nell's biggest frying pan. But yeah, he's just hanging out, like dripping venom off of his fangs. Yeah. So Tim fills this up, and the Covenant Man turns the basin of water into like a scrying surface, into a pool, with a magic wand that is made out of a stick shift from a dodge dart.
Very good.
Well, like, what did you think of this little segment? Like, of just that little detail of our world poking out.
As with all those ones, it just, because there hasn't been much of that, but obviously it feels in line with sort of the second half of the series, especially. But it's very welcome to have that little bit of comedy during all this. Just dodge dart from America.
Yeah. I love this. Tim has no idea what America is. He's like, "What's America? Oh, it's a kingdom that is filled with toy-loving idiots." Is what he said, which is funny because from Randall Flagg's time in America, he loved his toys.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Oh. And also, I love the idea that even though this is long ago in Roland's time, like, you have somebody walking around with a Dodge Dart, presumably from, the 70s, 80s, or beyond, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I can't remember when the Dodge Dart was in production.
I'm so much not a car person besides being like, that's a thing from a car.
Yeah.
But it works. It's good enough for me and Dodge, so I it's all good for me.
Yeah. So, what do you think of what they see in the scrying pool?
So yeah, that pretty just this how he describes his Kel's whacking his mom with just this big ass what is it? It's
like a ceramic jug or something like that.
Yeah, it just the idea of ceramic jug's not going to be light, and just him just holding the handle and just kicking her on the ground is your King is just very good at describing it to just make it as like revolting as possible, Yeah. And just having Tim be from this place of just like not being able to react and just having to watch it unfold is very very violent against him.
Yeah, like it is a specific it is almost a specific violence against him. I say that not to minimize what's happening now because it's terrible, but like think about everything that's been set into place. The only reason that Kells is brought to a head like this is because the Covenant Man gave Tim the key to open this up, but not the ability to lock it back and hide his tracks. Yeah. Kells returns home drunk, sees what Tim did, Tim is too far away to really do anything about it. And, the wrath is turned on Nell. And then the Covenant Man forces Tim to watch. Like, this is a diabolical plan.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that, like, you just have this connection with scrying to generally be into the future, but the fact that he's specifically showing him that's something that's currently happening or even in the past slightly, just really is like turning the knife. Just, oh yeah, this already happened. You can't do anything about this, and then not letting him leave.
Yeah, like keeping him around. Like, Tim screams so hard that the water's disturbed and it breaks the image, and it cuts forward to, fortunately, showing the widow Smack, who is first described as a woman with no face, appearing to basically come to Nell's rescue. Yeah, this sucks. And before Tim can go, well, guess what? The violence goes even further. Covenant Man says, "Hey, go dump your water, but do it downstream a little bit, away from the Pookie. You're gonna get got." And guess what's in there? Well, it's Big Ross's body.
Lidless. I hated that detail. Every time it came up, is he made sure you knew that he had no eyelids.
Yeah. No eyelids, but other than that, perfectly preserved in the cool water beneath it, like maybe with some hair basically eaten away by the fish or whatever.
So basically just someone looking very shocked, I assume.
Yes.
Like, just a very horrifying way to, like, and just back to back with the scrying that rolls right into this.
Yeah. Well, it could be worse because the Covenant Man posed his body that way. When he initially found him, he saw that basically was like the back of his head was riven by an axe. It's like, I decided to spare you the image of your dad's head split open by showing you his lidless eyes.
Yeah, very very benevolent of him.
Yeah, a real big heart, Mr.
Yeah,
Flag.
yeah, huge heart.
Yeah. So Tim starts freaking out. Covenant Man sedates him and tells the story. What happened? There was no dragon. Kells, was basically jealous of what Big Ross had, or envious of what Big Ross had. He had always had eyes for Nell. And so when he got him in the woods, when the moment was right, he took the axe, put it in the back of his head, and then to kind of forge the story about the dragon, he burned his own arm, to kind of create a burn wound to build it up. And the Covenant Man, again, big heart on him. He has also found Big Ross's axe and sharpened it up and shined it up all nice and good. So
yeah, yep. And when he asked Tim what he's going to do with it, he buried in Big Kells. He's like, clever boy, as if this wasn't. He's visibly happy that it's going exactly as he wants.
Yeah, he is walking. He's walking Tim down this cattle blind, and the Widow Smack identifies it, like spot on a little later on, basically saying like, oh, he goes from town to town. He probably saw one bright spot here in this town. He saw you, and he couldn't let that be. He wanted to put that light out for his own fun.
Yep. Yeah, he saw it fall into place. It's interesting to me too. It gets slightly more explanation later, possibly, but especially in contrast with the Covenant Man, Kells didn't really have a plan, so he's not thinking long term. Because when I was reading it, I was thinking, oh, he must have planned this thing for a long time, and he must have done all this. But it's becoming increasingly clear that Kells just saw an opportunity and just acted, which is, it's just an interesting contrast with how like the Covenant Man coming in is just forming this very intricate plan, and it's just against Kells' basically impatience and just acting. Because I think the whole reason even really happens where it does is because whoever owns that section was out because of a tree falling or something.
Yeah, like that section wasn't being logged because the people who own the stake or whatever, one of them got hit by like a rogue tree. It fell the wrong way. I love that detail about like, oh, the people think the Ironwoods have a mind of their own. That's why they cry their pardon before the day, because this happens so often. It's just an Ironwood will fall the wrong direction.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because I was trying to think, the Covenant Man being so like having all these plans and being so like clever like that. I was trying to like, I couldn't read anything from it, but I was wondering if there was any chance that the Covenant Man somehow helped to push this situation into happening, or if he just stumbled across and like sort of threw this plan together.
Yeah. So the way he describes it, or at least the story that he tells Tim, puts it where none of this none of this would ever have been noticed if Kells didn't say a dragon got him, right? Mm-hmm. Because that story travels far and wide, and it reached him. It reached Randall Flagg, and he heard like, oh, a dragon, huh? Well, that's wrong. There's murder afoot, and that's what turned his attention to the case.
Yeah. Yeah, he's so good at this stuff that you're almost like, did he somehow do something? But that seems most likely. But you just feel his fingerprints on everything.
Yeah, the things basically enough stuff isn't a coincidence that you think coincidence can't exist in this. Exactly. That everything has to be a part of his plan, or has to be taken into account by him. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So, the story's out, the sedation wears off, Tim vomits in disgust and rage, and, Covenant Man says like, hey, I'll be around a little while longer, knowing that Tim has been set off basically as wound up as he could possibly be.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Tim returns home. Finds the Widow Smack there taking care of him. And this kind of brings in kind of like a longer section. And this ultimately accounts for why this episode is probably going to be a little bit shorter, is because by the page count, this is about as long as we usually cover. But like, there's mostly just like putting things in place, right? Tim returns home. The widow smack is there. What we found out is that Kel's, one of the blows that Kel's landed on her with the ceramic jug knocked Nell blind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that her sight will return when her brain stops swelling, but nobody's really taking in, nobody really is holding out a lot of hope, right?
Yep.
But there's a lot of making arrangements for this. The women are coming around to watch after Nell and help prepare for things, and the men are rounding up a posse to go find Kel's because he's disappeared.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, kind of thrown off here as like weird little foreshadowing, the widow smack thinks that a Stark blast might be coming, even though one hasn't been here in years, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's feeling warm, or one of the signs of it.
Yeah, like warmer than usual weather in the fall, I think, because this is post reap, I think.
Yep. Yeah. Winter is coming.
Yes. Yeah. Outside of that very sudden winter, the very sudden and intense winter of a Stark blast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the widow smack has Tim basically tell the entire story, asking for every single detail. And this is where we get a very good description of the Covenant Man and the Randall Flagg character across the ages. He is pestilence given a pulse.
Yep. Yeah, that's a very good line.
Yeah. So here's my question for you. You've read the books. Have you read the comics, Sean?
Just a little bit, but not all the way. So I wasn't sure if I did whatever reference here went over my head for the time.
Yeah. There's a little bit of confusion. After we cover this book, we're going to start talking about kind of the second half and basically the things that lead up to the fall of Gilead, which gets into more of Randall Flagg's backstory. Some of these details. So, the widow smack and talking about the Covenant Man says, there's a rumor that he's Merlin, but that can't be. Merlin, is rumored to have a house in the middle of the woods where time stands still. Tim is, held wrapped by this.
Yeah.
But like the comics go pretty far in the direction of implying that the Covenant Man, that Randall Flagg isn't so much Merlin himself, but is actually like the son of Merlin, like is somehow related to him.
Okay. Yeah. It was a little bit confusing here, and from my very brief wiki diving, I started to see some of this and knew that I obviously hadn't read the material. So yeah. That sets it up what happens later on to just be a little bit strange.
Yeah.
Just feel a little weird.
Yeah. So it's, like that is a conflict that we're going to run into. That is, just the contradiction between the two teams. The comics, I think by the time they reached that point, I think that the comics reached that point before this book came out. And I think that King, he was aware of those, like he had creative input into them, but he didn't have, he decided to kind of walk his own way with it. So,
okay, yeah.
we're just going to have to be comfortable with those contradictions. I think that, I think that the story we ultimately get about Randall Flagg is more satisfying than, he's a wizard's son.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because not having that background when she's implying that he might be Merlin, I don't want him to be a character like that. No. I don't want him to be that like mythical in his background. I kind of prefer him like just kind of coming out of the shadows and causing chaos.
Yeah. Just fully living into the Nyarlathotep kind of guys, right?
Exactly. The background of him potentially looking at one of the, of him having the wizard's glass and it driving him mad just feels unsatisfying versus him just kind of always existing as this real bastard of a person.
Yeah. The characterization of Merlin also is vastly different in this book compared to what we get from the comics as well. So just it's a thing that doesn't line up. And when that happens, it doesn't have a lot of bearing on anything. So I implore the reader or the listener to pick whatever they think is coolest.
Yeah. The greater cosmology as it gets out into like Merlin and then like Crimson King and Queen, stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. I do get a little lost as I start. Like, I haven't, just as I said, it's mostly wiki things that I start
Mm-hmm.
to see these things called out.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I really love, obviously, the world of the Dark Tower. But when it gets to those sort of details, I do kind of look the other way a little bit, just
Yeah.
because I don't quite want that much explained.
Yeah. It's probably not unwise to unfocus your eyes at
Yeah,
some of that.
yeah.
That's not good criticism, but we're here to respond, I think, more than anything, and put things together and appreciate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just want to put a flag in that for everybody who might be reading ahead and might be confused. It is confused. So there's this long discussion about kind of the nature of the Covenant Man, but the entire the entire thing basically comes down to he's bad news, stay away. At one point back in the camp, the Covenant Man had mentioned the Sai, these kind of fairy folk. It's a small detail right now. It's a detail that Tim leaves out. They're going to become important later on in this book, but I want to highlight that right here.
He doesn't share that he was told this by the Covenant Man because I think Tim already knows that he's going to go following that vision, and he doesn't want to sort of let her onto it at this point.
No, Tim is dead set on doing something about this because everybody's very kind of content to take a very safe, point of view. Like the Widow Smack is kind of repeating as a mantra, there'll be water if God wills it. Will my mom get her sight back? There'll be water if God wills it. Will Kells come back and finish the job? There will be water if God wills it. And there's this amazing, it's almost it's kind of a very quiet fuck yeah moment. But upon hearing this, Tim decides, no, that's bullshit. And he doesn't say it to her, but he recalls something that his dad said, that Big Ross said. And I want like a picture book of Big Ross's adventures. But, Big Ross's saying is, pray for rain all you like, but dig a well as you do it. Prayer doesn't have to stand in for action. Go out and, take matters into your hands. Right.
Yep. Yeah. It's a good line.
Badass.
Yeah.
After Big Ross is buried, and I love the sense of community around the small town. Tree seems like a very pleasant place.
Oh yeah.
Kel's aside.
Yeah, I think that whole scene where he's going to see his father to represent his family is really, it does develop a lot of nice stuff with just everybody being so accommodating and sort of recognizing him as a kid, but also considering the situation, also giving him sort of the place as a man as well. Sort of referring to him very formally and just sort of like letting him grow into this responsibility that's sort of been thrust upon him while still letting him be a kid saying goodbye to his dad. I thought that scene was pretty touching overall, just how it plays out.
Yeah. One of the loggers, Tim calls him like Sai, he basically gives him the honorific and he says, no, you're old enough now. Basically you're the man of your house. So just call me by, just call me by my first name. It's fine. I love the idea of like this being unusual. I love the idea that Kells in this violence is not kind of acknowledged as just kind of like, well, that's just the way it goes on. That's just the way it goes. The world has moved on. But everybody kind of just gathers in support of kind of the victims of this bad actor and tries to set things right. It's such a contrast to even what we see of Midworld and Roland's time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And his father is buried in an ironwood coffin, and he says that it'll be there for 1,000 years. And when it said that, I was just knowing how valuable ironwood is. I imagine that this wasn't something obviously that his mother could afford. I assumed that the axemen got together and the town just said, no, we respected your father and we want to like do this for you. It's not called out, but it sort of keeps that what you're saying about like the world hasn't really moved on here. They still have this sense of order and balance that Kells is really upsetting with what he's doing.
Yeah. It's just it's a small thing, but given how much everything else sucks it is nice to have that heartwarming, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So after the burial, Tim sees something sticking out of the grass, and the Covenant man hasn't finished working his magic here. He has actually left the magic wand. He's left the stick shift of the dodge dart, where he knew Tim would find it. And Tim even thinks he sees the basin, this thing that is literally more valuable than half the forest that they log. But no, it's just a bucket. But Tim has picked up from the Covenant man that any object can be magical, and so he recreates the scrying.
Yep.
He picks up the bucket, puts some water in it, and does the one incantation he knows, abacadabra. and and he gets the vision of what's kind of waiting for him if he decides to set out, if he decides to go and seek out the Covenant man, on his own. And yeah, let's talk about what he sees in here, because it's a little bit of a preview of the rest of the book, but it's very specific snippets that are not really alluding to, again, this kind of cattle blind that he has that the Covenant man is going to send Tim down. So what do you think about what he sees in here?
You're seeing it, and he's digging it because it's showing him kind of the answer to all of his problems, and this nice journey, but you're just kind of screaming no, like this is not going to be this convenient, because it's just this. He finds Merlin and his big house, and Merlin provides him with this just perfect. He seems to have the cure for exactly what's going on wrong with his mom.
It's like a silent movie, or like a silent pantomime of everything working out right. Like, it shows the signs of where he should go, like go beyond the Ironwood Trail, head toward Fagonard, find the sign that says traveler beware, and then like the Covenant man like makes like little running motions with his hands. And then he gets something from Merlin, and then like Tim sees himself like hugging his mom, who is crying with joy that she is all that she is all put together. Like this is not to be trusted.
No. No, it's I mean, obviously it's his plan, but this is the part where I was just like, thinking about the Covenant man, and just like, you're such a dick. Just like, you show him his mom getting hit in his dad's body, and then you just hit him with this just because he's gotten him so wound up that he's so desperate. It's just, and he's an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Just like, and this is his hobby too. Like,
yeah. Torturing people. I think early on, when they're at the camp, Tim kind of observes like, oh, he's teasing me or he's torturing me. I'm not sure which, but he definitely doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this section ends. It ends with, Tim basically being found out by the widow Smack. She's back at the house taking care of Nell. And this is another sweet moment where she knows that she can't stop Tim. He's got his mind set to it. And so if he's going to go out into the woods, an axe isn't going to be enough, his dad's axe. So she decides to give him her brother's gun. It's a 4-shooter.
Yeah, that she's had for 20 years now.
Something like that, yeah. And, guns are not common. Like, I think there's a detail Tim, upon looking at it, is astonished because he's only ever seen a drawing of a rifle. Like somebody in town has like a piece of art that like depicts a rifle.
Mm-hmm.
So the widow Smack, shows it to him, shows him how to load it. I think he has like somewhat like 5 or 6 bullets, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's just that for her, it just says a lot about how much she cares for Tim, because she's not only not, she's treating him with the dignity to let him go do what he has to do, and then giving him what I assume is kind of the memory of her brother, right, who died shortly after getting this, and she oils it every year. So, and she's not doing that to actually use it. She's just doing that to keep it in good condition to honor his memory. So to give this to Tim was a really, like you said, like a lot of this is so dark that when there's any sort of like self-sacrifice or sense of community, you sort of cling to it.
Yeah. And so Tim, before he leaves, he asks for a blessing, right? Because he basically knows, like, he's taking everything into his own hands to do this. If he succeeds, his mom is cured. If he dies, well, he's all that his mom has left, even including her sight, right? And she refuses to do it. She's like, I can give you my gun, but I can't give you my blessing. But as he walks away, she, basically says, like, Gan bless him anyway.
Yep.
And that is where we end, with kind of an invocation of the name of the force that, is behind the white. I forget if the force of good has been described as the white as of yet.
I can't recall, but very sparingly, if so.
Yeah. And that spins out again later. Like we said at the beginning, that is a bit of a preview of the greater cosmology that's going to work its way into the final 3 books of the series. Yeah. And yeah, Tim goes off like as the stars come out, setting out in the middle of the night into the deepest woods, this thing that is literally called the Endless Woods, to find a wizard's house.
Yeah, it's interesting because just my memory of this being like this whole section is really just like a huge setup for what's to follow as far as what I would consider like a fairy tale. This is like, even though the Covenant Man is definitely sort of a fairy tale character, and there's been some magic with the scrying, like everything from here on out is much more, I would consider it like a fairy tale. So it really feels like a setup for this.
Yeah. And it's been a while so I haven't read ahead. Obviously I've read this book before. What do you mean? Stop accusing me of not reading this. Of course I forget. I don't think the Covenant Man shows up anymore after this. I think that he has set things in motion and put them forward. So it's been very good to kind of camp out on the way his fingerprints are on all of the misfortune here.
He doesn't show up. He's alluded to, perhaps, but yeah, it's a whole, the whole tone of this is very different from then on out. It's still dark, but it's much more of an adventure than this whole, I guess this is sort of thoughts about this section, but it's just so dark. It's just like, just with the fact that it's just dealing with like abuse and loss, and it's really spends a good amount of time going over all those things, and just this sense of like, she could have chosen, his mom could have chosen not to marry Kells, but she didn't have much of a choice. Right. It wasn't, they were going to have to go out on the land, and then he didn't have to do any of the stuff with the Covenant Man. So there's just this, in this section, I was struck by this feeling of like inevitability, just like being pulled toward this, which gets into the greater themes of like wind through the keyhole, which he'll get into later, which sort of relates to this same idea of just being pulled toward something.
Yeah. I didn't notice it until you brought it up, but like Nell's whole situation is very similar to what Susan was put through. Right. A beloved family member died, somebody who genuinely had a good heart, and that caused, a certain number of things to click into place and, basically put her into a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
I like this section an awful lot. I like this book an awful lot. Something that came out just kind of in the discussion is like the comparison, right, between Kells' cruelty and the Covenant Man's cruelty, right? Just the evil that one man does to another, as, kind of short-sighted and, kind of opportunistic, but the way that can be grabbed and harnessed and directed to do even more harm, by somebody who is thinking in a longer way. Just like the what this reveals about not just Randolph Flagg, but basically anybody who is working on that side, casts a light on kind of the forces of destruction that we're dealing with, from Farson on to basically anybody who is trying to unravel the order.
Yeah, exactly. I love I've mentioned it before, but there are quite a few references, and I love when they sort of build into this, we get most of it from Roland, who just loves Gilead, and it's just interesting to see between this and the events of the previous book, just just like sort of not tarnishing Gilead, but sort of presenting some of the realities
Yeah.
and why this stuff was set up, and just how people like Farson and Flag could just take advantage of these very real sort of, these very real emotions and issues, and just twist them and just ramp it all up.
Yeah.
And it felt just a hair too real in 2018.
yeah, that kind of populism and resentment and stuff like that. It's it's easy to kind of look at it and say like, oh yeah, it's depicted as purely evil when it's somebody like Farson, and when we see what's going on by the time the big coffin hunters are out there, basically committing mass crimes and defrauding entire towns, et cetera. But like when it is actual people, living their lives and having to make these very difficult choices because of the order that's enforced on them, like you can kind of see that it isn't as kind of unambiguous as it ends up being, right?
Yeah. Basically, Flag is the deep state.
Man.
Anyways.
So thanks, Sean. Thank you for coming on. Where can people find you?
You can most easily find me on Twitter at the Lore Hunter, where do a lot of talking as you do on Twitter, and from there you can check out, I guess it's kind of timely with, for now, with a lot of Bloodborne stuff going on, sort of my steez, but the lorehunter.com is sort of where I collect Bloodborne lore content presented by the community, such as everything that Bonfireside Chat did, and everything Vadi did, all the lore content that people came up with for Bloodborne, I tried to put into one place. So sort of my monument to the game. So
it's been it's been a little bit of like a delayed release kind of treasure treat, like all the kind of like data mining stuff that's coming out about the game.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
it's a good time to jump back in if you've been out of it for a while.
Oh yeah, like as people are listening to this, it only applies during this month, but like a bunch of people are playing it now because it's free on PS Plus, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's the timing is really real good for all this stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You can find me on Twitter at Cole Ross, or the other shows here on Duckfeed.tv. And yeah, I think that's about all we need to do by way of admin. We can keep this one short and sweet. Until next time, long days and pleasant nights.
Long days and pleasant nights.